As you may imagine, one of the key requirements for any episode of River Hunters is indeed a river. But the episode that features the Battle of Culloden, we have a particular problem, given that the battle itself took place high up on Drummossy Moor, which is void of rivers. However, there are two rivers that run around that battlefield, and one of which is this one here. So I'm sitting on the banks of the River Ness in Inverness, this huge river, really wide, but strangely very shallow. So Inverness itself is a very historic old town. The bridge that you see over my shoulder unfortunately isn't an old bridge, it's relatively modern. But we do know, looking at contemporary paintings from the late 17th century, John Sleeser's painting for example. John Sleeser produced this whole series of wonderful pictures of various towns and cities in Scotland. He was actually the chief, he held the office of chief engineer for Scotland, and his works, do look him up, really, really lovely pieces of artwork. And Sleeser's picture of Inverness in, I think it was 1693, shows the castle, it shows the church spires, the built environment of the city, and indeed the open landscape that went around it. But right in the middle of his picture is actually the old bridge, this old stone bridge, which must have been there before he was born, and whether or not it was there at the time of the battle in 1746 we don't know. What we do know is that those Highlanders who were chased down from the battlefield trying to make it across the River Ness would have had to descend on this location. So we have this wonderful snapshot of time, this 2, 3, 4 hour window where potentially the Highlanders were able to cross this river via the old stone bridge and make it to some relative safety. So we have an opportunity to come here, I believe, because the river, although it's big and wide, is very, very shallow, and I'll drop my camera underwater in a few moments just to go and have a look. So I'm quite excited by this. I'm going to report back and say the River Ness is, although it looks big and dark and scary, actually it's very searchable. And given that Inverness has been here for many centuries, the material culture evidence of the people who lived here will be lying just in those rivers. Were there shops and booths and bothies on the bridge? Were people traders crossing the bridge? What was accidentally lost from that bridge? So any coins from that 17th century, maybe even late 16th century coins that might have been still in circulation. Probably one of the star finds would be a French coin, evidence of those French soldiers who served with the joined the Jacobite cause. So for me, really exciting. I'm going to recommend that we actually give this a go, and who knows, maybe it'll feature in an episode of River Hunters. Okay, so now moved approximately 50 metres downstream from the site of the old bridge, the area where we really want to be searching. Actually, this area downstream is really, really interesting. I'm on what appears to be a sort of a ramp, an access ramp, down to the water's edge. So if we follow it down, you can see that it actually makes a really good access point for any filming that we would do. The ramp itself actually appears to have some age. It's made of huge stone blocks. And given that this general area of Inverness has been built up in recent years and a lot of modern work's being done here, this does appear to have some age. And there's some work stone down there going in. And as we come down to the water's edge down here, you might make out that there's a sequence of blocks going around. So this is a purpose-built ramp. It actually sweeps around there, which is really interesting. So the reason I brought you down here is to look at the water clarity and the water depth. And from where I'm standing on the edge here, it appears to be no deeper than probably knee deep. And I'm guessing I could walk out quite a far way as well. In recent days there's been some heavy snowfall up in Scotland, even though it's early May. And the river itself is slightly elevated because of this melting snow. The temperature as well is absolutely freezing. You would want it to seriously warm up before you came back and get Bo and Rick and myself in there, and the safety team. So what I'm going to do now is just pan the camera around, just put it underwater, just so you get a sense of what the river level's like. Perhaps you gauge the flow, which isn't too bad. I would safely jump in there, wade in there. So I'll do that and hopefully get a good sense, and then we're going to change location and go off and investigate the River Nairn after this one. Okay, here we go. So in this episode of River Hunters, we are looking for the original position of the 17th century bridge, the old Ness Bridge, which was actually built in 1684. It survived right the way through to 1849 when it was destroyed in a flood, and then replaced by the suspension bridge. So if we can locate exactly where the bridge is itself, the foundations, that sort of confirms the point at which the Jacobites fleeing from the Battle of Culloden would have tried to get across. But John Sleaze's picture of Inverness, which is dated to 1693, suggests that the bridge itself had a portcullis at the city end of Inverness, at the east end. And that may have prohibited the rebels themselves from getting across, in which case you can just imagine how they would have forded across the river in that general direction there. So what I'm going to do now is drop the camera down underwater, just get you, give you a chance to see the huge foundation stones, these massive blocks that are pretty much still in situ. And when I get towards the front, you'll see how the stonework curves round, almost like buttresses or cutwaters, to deflect that flood water that comes down. I think they're called, referred to as starlings as well. And when I come up to the top, you'll see the grooves that have been cut in, where the iron bands would have been put in and used as clamps to bind the two big blocks together. So fantastic footage. I'm going to drop the camera down there now. So when I was first asked if I would travel up to Inverness in Scotland to investigate the battlefield site of Culloden as a potential episode of River Hunters, I jumped at the chance. The battle itself, which took place on the 16th of April 1746, was an event that probably didn't need to happen. It ended up being a needless slaughter. It was in fact the last battle ever fought on the British mainland, and the final battle of the Jacobite, or the final Jacobite uprising. Now I could go into great detail about the battle itself, how a superior, well-armed, well-fed, well-stocked government force lined up in their ranks, their lines of three, and let loose volley after volley of firelocks into the charge of the Jacobites. Bonnie Prince Charlie had, perhaps foolishly, decided that this was the spot on Drumossie Moor that he would confront the British. And it was a faithful decision, it really was. The night before, they'd marched 16 miles to Nairn. They got within 3 or 4 miles and they heard the drum beat. And fearing that the surprise was up, they turned around. So without food and water, they travelled another 13 miles back towards Inverness and decided to stand and fight on Drumossie Moor. The battle itself was a brutal affair, this hand-to-hand combat, and many contemporary accounts survive from that time. And rather than sort of go into the politics of it all, I've chosen a few that I just want to go through here. So in the April 1746 edition of the Scots magazine, which was entitled The Motions and Operations of the Army, they gathered all of the letters that had been sent out by any of the surviving British soldiers. The story of the Jacobite side didn't come to light for many, many weeks, well indeed months, if not years later. So initially we had this perhaps very biased contemporary account from the British soldiers of the events that took place this day. I just want to read out 3 of them. So a soldier writing back said, part of the rebels fled towards Badenoch and Fort Augustus, and others through Inverness to Rossshire, which is the historic county name, and they would have to get there over the Bewley first. Another soldier wrote, their right wing outflanked our left, which fell a little, but our men fairly beat them back with bayonets and made great slaughter of them. Another wrote, but the regiment on our right, where his Royal Highness was, did not take their firelocks from their shoulders. Though the rebels came down, firing their pistols and brandishing their swords, 3 times within 100 yards, yet dare not attack. So that is an account which refers to the left-hand flank of the Jacobite charge thing, and they never actually engaged it. But it was a different story on the right-hand flank. And there's a wonderful little quote which I've investigated a little bit further, little reference. It simply says, Colonel Richard lost his left hand. So who was Colonel Richard? And losing a left hand is pretty horrific. Colonel Richard was Sir Robert Rich. In 1756 he was actually appointed the governor of Londonderry and Culmore, which suggests he survived the battle. And that is incredible, given that he lost his left hand to a sword, his right forearm to another sword blow, and he had 6 cuts to his head. So you can just imagine, this is a man who was he was actually lieutenant colonel on the day. He was commanding Barrow's regiment, the 4th of Foot, over on the government's left flank. And that is the location where the Jacobite charge actually crashed into the government line. This line of 3, all firing the firelocks. The Jacobites had already been exposed to a barrage of canister and grape shot, and that just tore into the ranks. And they, desperate to engage, they did the full-on head charge. And when they got within, say, 50 yards, the government soldiers let loose another barrage of musket shot into them, and it took out so many clansmen would have died or fell wounded, mortally wounded on the battlefield at that point. But the momentum of the charge meant that the Highlanders actually crashed into the 3 lines of redcoats, and with their swords and dirks they tore into them. And that's why Robert Rich was badly injured as he was. You can just sense the ferocity, the bitter hand-to-hand struggle, the swords lashing down, clearing hands clean off, being pushed through men. Death was here. And there is actually references to that first front line actually being pushed back, but the soldiers who were just behind there were able to use the bayonets and just effectively just tear the Highlanders down and down and down and wear them down. And then the dragoons came around from sort of outflanked them as well, and they were attacking. And the regiments that were positioned just behind that initial line of government troops, they were able to change position and effectively surrounded, well, on 3 sides, and just let the volley after volley loose into those Highlanders. In reality, they didn't stand a chance. It was a horrific waste of life. So, given that the whole thing was over in 30 minutes, and perhaps between, if you read the accounts, between 500 and 1,500 Highlanders died during that initial assault or in the pursuit, then that might have left about 4,000 Highlanders to effectively walk off the battlefield, and that's an incredible fact if you didn't know that. The Lowland regiments, which were positioned to the right of the Jacobite assault, effectively set off in a southerly direction. They were going to Badenoch and Fort Ruthven Barracks and Fort Augustus. Bonnie Prince Charlie himself was led off under escort, and although they were pursued by the dragoons did pick off the loose, you can just imagine, a loose Highlander separated from his main group of friends and brothers would be picked off and killed. But actually the dragoons suffered heavily themselves in the pursuit. 16 horses were killed. They couldn't actually get anywhere near the large block of Highlanders because they were firing the pistols and musket shot at them and just taking them out. But if you were loose or you were slow or injured, you would probably die upon this battlefield. So a large body of men, perhaps 2,000 or 3,000, set off in southeasterly direction, heading to safety that way. Others, and these were typically the Highlanders, were over to the right, or the left flank, and they were separated from the main group, and they had, the only option they then had was to head in a northwesterly direction to Inverness, which is about 6 miles away over there, and try to get across the River Ness as depicted in the accounts. So that sort of sets the scene for where the river hunters should go and investigate. We have the River Nairn in that way, and we have the River Ness in that direction. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to just finish now by just turning the camera around and letting you just watch, see the headstones and the burial mounds of the Highlanders. Okay.